My name is Owen Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I work as a structural engineer at a mid-size firm in Portland, and I am not the kind of person who does dramatic things. I pay my bills early, I set 3 alarms, I print my boarding pass the night before and arrive at the airport 2 hours ahead of schedule every single time, without exception. I'm the person who has already located the gate, confirmed the departure board twice, and settled into a seat with a black coffee before most people have finished the security line. So when I tell you that I missed my flight that afternoon, not because of traffic, not because of a long security queue, not because I overslept, but because I chose to, you have to understand how completely impossible that should have been. And the fact that it wasn't, that the most reliable man in every room just sat down next to a crying stranger and let the minutes tick away without moving, tells you everything you need to know about who Clara Reyes turned out to be. It was a Tuesday in late November. Gate 17 at Portland International. I was on my way to Seattle for a second-round interview at Farrow & Klein, one of the most respected structural engineering firms in the Pacific Northwest. I had been working toward this moment for 3 years. 3 years of late nights, extra certifications, a master's program I finished while holding down my full-time job. My portfolio was polished. My suit was pressed. I had rehearsed the likely questions so many times that my responses had stopped sounding rehearsed and started sounding like thoughts I actually had. The interview was at 2 in the afternoon. My flight departed at 11:45. I was at the gate by 10 past 10, exactly as planned. Coffee in hand. Seat found. Presentation notes open on my laptop. Completely, perfectly ready. She was 4 seats to my left, at the end of the row facing the windows. The seat beside her was empty. Her coat was dark gray, slightly too large for her. The kind you grab in a hurry without checking the size. A black rolling carry-on sat at her feet, handle still extended, like she had parked it and hadn't had the energy to push it down. She held her phone in both hands, close to her face, and her shoulders were doing something I recognized immediately. That contained deliberate effort of a person trying very hard not to cry in public. Small, rapid breaths, eyes unblinking. The particular stillness of someone holding everything inside with their whole body. I had seen it before. After my father's surgery 6 years ago, I spent most of a hospital waiting room doing exactly the same thing. You learn to recognize it. The shape of someone carrying something they didn't ask to carry. I looked away. It wasn't my business. I sipped my coffee and checked my phone. Gate 17 departure, on time. Boarding in 40 minutes. I had more than enough time to review the final section of my presentation notes. I opened the document, read 3 lines, looked back at her. She wasn't crying yet. She was still fighting it. But her phone screen had gone dark against her palm and she hadn't noticed, and the way she was staring through the glass of the terminal window, past the gray tarmac, past the slow-moving luggage carts, past all of it, at something that wasn't there, told me she had just been handed something heavy. Too heavy to carry normally, too heavy to put down. One of those weights that follows you even when you close your eyes. I told myself it wasn't my place. I read 2 more lines of my notes. The first tear came quietly. No warning sound. It just fell down the side of her face and she reached up and pressed the back of her wrist against her cheek so fast it looked like a reflex, something practiced out of habit. Her jaw tightened. She pulled a breath through her nose. She was working so hard to be invisible in a public space that I found myself holding my own breath, as if making too much noise might shatter the control she was holding on to. I don't know what made me stand up. I'm still not entirely sure. There was no plan, no internal debate I can trace in steps. One moment I was sitting there telling myself it was none of my concern, and the next I was folding my laptop into my bag, picking up my coffee, and walking 4 seats to the left. I left one empty chair between us, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd her. I sat down, set my cup on the armrest, said very quietly, "Hey." She turned. Whatever she had expected to see, it wasn't me, a man in a gray suit holding a coffee, looking at her like he had nowhere else to be. Her eyes were red at the edges but not fully blown. She was younger than I had guessed, maybe 26, 27, dark hair pulled back loosely, a few pieces falling across her cheek. She looked at me with the particular weariness of someone who had already spent too much emotional energy today and had none left over for confusion. "I'm not trying to bother you," I said. I noticed you looked like you were having a rough one, and I didn't feel right sitting over there and pretending I hadn't." I held up the coffee. "I've got an extra sugar packet if that helps anything." She stared at me for a second. Then something in her face shifted, just slightly. Not a smile. More like the easing of a held breath. "That's a very random thing to offer a stranger," she said. Her voice was steadier than I expected. "I know. I'm running low on better ideas." She let out something that was almost a laugh, but not quite. Then she looked back at the window. "My flight just got cancelled," she said, "and my phone is almost dead, and I don't have a charger." She stopped, started again. "It's been a bad week, that's all." "I'm sorry," I said. I meant it, though I still didn't know the half of it. Her name was Clara Reyes. She told me that 10 minutes into the conversation, after I had found a charging cable in the bottom of my carry-on, I always travel with two, another thing my father called excessive and I called common sense, and after we had relocated to the row of seats nearest the outlet by the gate column, she plugged in her phone and watched the screen blink back to life and let out the kind of exhale that tells you someone has been quietly dreading something for a while. "Clara," I said. "I'm Owen." She nodded, her eyes already moving to the screen, to the cascade of texts that had stacked up while her battery was dead. I watched her read them and watched her face go through several things at once, and I did not ask what they said. After a while, she put the phone face down on her knee. Her hand trembled, just slightly, against the fabric of her jeans. "I came out here 5 days ago," she said, "to handle things, after my dad." She didn't finish the sentence in any conventional way, she just let the last 2 words sit there, and I understood them without needing the rest. "I'm sorry," I said. "Different weight this time." "He was 63, she said, "which everyone keeps telling me isn't that young, but it feels young to me." She pressed her lips together. "He lived out here alone for the last 4 years, after my mom remarried and moved to Phoenix. I'm in Denver, so I came by myself to sort through his apartment, sign papers, talk to his neighbors, return his library books." She said that last part quietly, like it had surprised her when she found herself doing it. "I didn't think it would take this long, or feel like this." I didn't say anything. I had learned, in the long months after my father's surgery, that the best thing you can offer someone in that specific kind of pain isn't words. It's just the willingness to stay in it with them for a minute. To not reach for the exit. "The apartment still smelled like him," she said. Her voice dropped. "Like coffee and this cedar closet organizer he bought when I was 12. He kept that thing for 20 years. I kept walking in and thinking he was just in the other room, that he'd come around the corner." She shook her head. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you this." "You don't have to apologize for it," I said. She looked at me. "You're very calm for a stranger in an airport." "I spent a lot of time in a hospital waiting room once," I said. "Someone sat next to me and didn't try to fix anything, just stayed. It helped more than anything else anyone did." Clara held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, the way people do when something small but true lands in exactly the right place. That was when the boarding announcement came over the speaker. "Group 2. My group." I heard my name in that mental way you hear your own name even when it isn't said aloud. Owen Calloway. "Group 2. The gate is 30 feet away, you should be standing up right now." My hand moved, just slightly, toward my bag. Then I looked at Clara, who was looking at her phone again, reading a new text she hadn't seen yet, and I watched the exact moment she read it. I saw her face go still in a way it hadn't gone still before. The kind of still that comes when a door closes softly and you realize it was the last one. I didn't pick up my bag. She put the phone down. Her hand was trembling harder now. "The hotel I had for tonight," she said, in the flat voice of someone who has run out of the capacity to react. "They overbooked. They just canceled my reservation." "Okay," I said. "Let's figure that out." She looked at me. "You're going to miss your flight." "I've got a few minutes," I said. which was not exactly true. I didn't have a few minutes. I had no minutes. My group had been called. The gate was 30 feet away. By the time we had pulled up hotel options on her newly charged phone and called the airline's rebooking line and spent 11 minutes on hold listening to the same 20-second loop of elevator music, I had missed the window entirely. I know the precise moment it happened because I saw the departure board update from boarding to departed at 12:18 in the afternoon, and I looked at it for about 4 seconds, and then I looked back at the airline representative I had just handed the phone to on Clara's behalf, and I kept going. Clara saw the board at the same moment I did. Her hand caught my arm. "Owen," her voice had changed. "Owen, you just missed your— Tell me you didn't just miss your flight." "I'm still here, aren't I?" I said. The least useful thing I could have said. I meant it completely. "Why would you—" She stopped. Let go of my arm like she had just realized she was holding it. "I'm a stranger. You don't even know me." "I know your name," I said. "And I know your dad kept a cedar closet organizer for 20 years. That's more than I know about most of my coworkers." She stared at me. I couldn't quite read what was happening in her expression. It wasn't gratitude, or not only gratitude. It was more like confusion with a complicated edge. The face of someone who has learned to expect so little from the people around them that a person simply staying in a seat feels like something they can't immediately categorize. The airline representative cleared his throat. I held up one finger at Clara and turned back to the task at hand. They put her on the standby list for a 5:40 flight, which was the best they could manage given the cancellations rippling through the afternoon schedule. If the standby didn't clear, the next guaranteed seat was the 7 a.m. departure the following morning. She had no hotel. She had a carry-on with 4 days of clothes in it and a few small things she had taken from her father's apartment. A watch that had stopped working. A folded photograph she showed me briefly without saying anything. A small blue mug she had wrapped in her sweater so it wouldn't break. We found her a hotel through a third-party booking site. Something budget but decent, 15 minutes from the airport by shuttle, that still had rooms because a conference group had released a block. I helped her confirm the reservation, get the confirmation number, and screenshot it on both our phones, because I have also been the person who arrived at a front desk and discovered the system had no record of them. When it was done, she sat back against the wall and looked at me with an expression I recognized as the one people wear when they've been helped in a way they didn't ask for and don't know how to account for. "I need to call you something other than the stranger who made me miss my flight," she said. "Owen is fine. And you didn't make me miss anything." "I literally did. You were in a difficult situation. I had a choice. I made it." She studied me. We were sitting on the floor near the outlet now, our backs against the terminal wall, bags beside us like two people who had accidentally ended up on a strange road trip together. The afternoon had the low quality of winter light through dirty glass, flat and gray and somehow honest. "What was your flight for?" she asked quietly. "Where were you going?" I hesitated. Not long enough to be obvious, but long enough for her to notice because Clara, I was beginning to understand, noticed things. "Job interview," I said. The color left her face. "Owen, it's okay. It is not okay." "What kind of job?" "A good one," I said. "Owen, it's really okay, Clara. It is really not." She grabbed her phone like she was going to find the number herself and call them. "Who were you interviewing with? Can you reschedule? You should call right now and explain." "I will call them," I said. "I'll call in a bit. It's handled." She looked at me like she didn't believe a single word of that. "You don't have to pretend it's fine," she said. "I'm not pretending it's fine. I'm saying I'll deal with it. There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the terminal moved in its usual current. Rolling suitcases, departure announcements, a toddler crying somewhere near the food court, the intercom voice saying final boarding for a flight neither of us was on. Clara looked at her hands. Then she looked back at me. "Why did you stay?" she asked. And it was a real question. Not rhetorical, not the kind people ask when they already know the answer. She was genuinely asking. Her eyes were steady on mine, and I got the sense she was the kind of person who would know immediately if the answer was something performative or calculated. so I thought about it honestly before I spoke. Because you looked like someone who was used to handling everything alone, I said. And I thought maybe today you didn't have to. She didn't answer for a while. My dad was like that, she said eventually. Handled everything alone. Even at the end, he didn't tell me how sick he was until he couldn't hide it anymore. I found out from his neighbor, Mrs. Patton, who called me because she'd noticed his lights weren't coming on in the evenings. She smoothed the edge of her sleeve. He didn't want to worry me. He thought he was protecting me, and I didn't get to help him with any of it. She shook her head. I got there 2 days before he passed. I barely had time. I didn't say I'm sorry again. I had already said it, and it wasn't enough. It's never enough. But saying it a third time would have been for my comfort more than hers. Instead, I said, "What was his name?" She looked up. People don't always ask that. "Martin," she said, and something in her face softened just slightly when she said it, the way faces do when you say the name of someone you love to a person who wasn't afraid to ask. Martin Reyes. He taught high school chemistry for 30 years. He made the best birria I've ever eaten in my life, including from actual restaurants that have lines around the block. He called me every Sunday evening at exactly 7 o'clock, and he always started the call by saying "so," as if we were picking up a conversation we'd left in the middle. Her voice wavered on the last part and she pressed her lips together. Last Sunday the phone didn't ring at 7. I kept looking at it for an hour before I remembered. I sat with that for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth missing," I said. "Yeah," she said softly. "He really was." We sat there in the noise and motion of the airport and said nothing for a while, and it didn't feel awkward. It felt like what it was. Two people who had found an unlikely patch of stillness together in a loud place and were not in any hurry to leave it. If you have ever grieved someone and found yourself at a loss for where to put it, surrounded by people who were afraid to sit close to it, you know exactly what I mean. You know how rare it is when someone just stays. I called Farrow & Klein at 2:15 in the afternoon, which is to say 15 minutes after my interview was supposed to begin. The receptionist transferred me to the HR coordinator, a woman named Diane who had a voice that was professionally warm in the way of someone who delivered both good news and bad news regularly and had learned to sound the same for both. I explained what had happened. Not all of it. I kept it simple. A personal situation had come up at the airport. Someone in a difficult circumstance who had needed assistance. I had missed my flight as a result and was unable to make the 2 o'clock appointment. I asked whether there was any possibility of rescheduling. There was a pause. Diane said she would need to check with the hiring manager and get back to me. She took my number. She did not make any promises. When I hung up, Clara was watching me. She had heard the whole thing, given that we were 3 feet apart on the floor of a public terminal. She didn't say yes, Clara said. She didn't say no either. Owen. The particular weight she put on my name now. I feel terrible. Don't, I said. That is not a reasonable thing to ask of me. Then feel whatever you need to feel about it, I said. Just know that I don't regret being here. She looked at me steadily. You don't even know if they'll reschedule. I know. That doesn't bother you? I thought about it genuinely before answering. It bothers me, I said. I won't pretend otherwise. I've been working toward this interview for 3 years, so yes, it bothers me. I glanced at the departure board, which still showed departed next to my flight number. But I think there are moments where you have a choice, and you can tell immediately which choice is going to follow you and which one isn't. If I had gotten on that plane, I would have made the interview, and I would have spent the whole flight wondering whether you were okay. She held my gaze for a long moment. You're a strange person, she said finally. But the way she said it wasn't unkind. It was more like a conclusion she had arrived at carefully and decided to accept. I know, I said. I mean that as a compliment, she said. I think. We talked for another 2 hours on that terminal floor. She told me she was a graphic designer in Denver, that she worked mostly with small businesses, the kind with the owner's name above the door and someone who still swept the floor at closing time. She loved the moment she handed a client their finished logo and watched their face. That specific recognition people have when they see themselves reflected in something that hadn't existed before she made it. I told her about structural engineering, about the particular satisfaction of standing on a bridge you calculated from the ground up and feeling the solidity of it beneath your feet, the knowledge that the math held. She asked good questions, the kind that required real answers. At around 4 o'clock, she bought us both coffee from the nearest kiosk, handed mine to me without asking how I took it, then looked startled. "You take it black, right? I just assumed." "How did you know that?" "You had a black coffee when you sat down," she said, "hours ago." I noticed things. Something about that sentence settled in me in a way I didn't examine too closely at the time. The 5:40 flight cleared standby. Clara got a seat. We walked to the new gate together, her carry-on rolling behind her, my suit jacket draped over my arm, both of us a little quieter than we'd been an hour before. The late November light was doing something particular through the terminal windows, that long slanting quality that makes everything look both warmer and more temporary than it is. At the gate, we stood in the particular limbo of an airport farewell. The boarding announcement had begun. The usual shuffle of people was organizing itself around us. "I'll be all right," she said. It was the first time she had said anything like that. I thought it might be the first time today she had believed it. "I know you will," I said. She reached into the side pocket of her carry-on and pulled out a business card, slightly bent at one corner, from when she'd been at a design firm in Denver. Her name in a clean dark font, Clara Reyes. Below it, a personal email and a phone number. She held it out to me. "For when you land that job," she said, "so you can tell someone who already knows what it cost you." I took the card, turned it over. On the back, she had written something quickly in pen borrowed from the gate agent. 2 words, "Thank you." I looked up at her. "You already said that." "It deserved saying twice," she said. She boarded. I watched the gate door close. I stood there for a few minutes, in that quiet that settles after something ends, trying to decide what it was I was actually feeling. I got a hotel room near the airport that night, changed out of my suit, sat on the edge of the bed with the TV off and the curtains half open, and room service I ate without tasting much. I turned her card over in my hands. I thought about Martin Reyes calling every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, starting with "so" as if no conversation ever really ended, just paused. Diane from Farrow & Klein called back at 8:47 the next morning. The hiring manager had reviewed my case, she said. Given the circumstances, they were willing to offer one alternative date, the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. I exhaled so slowly it felt like something I'd been holding since the board updated to departed. "Tuesday at 2, I said. "I'll be there." "We'll see you then, Mr. Calloway," Diane said. Then, with a slight shift in tone I hadn't heard before. For what it's worth, the hiring manager said that the kind of person who misses an interview for a reason like that is exactly the kind of person he'd like to meet. I put the phone down, sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up Clara's card and texted the number on the back. 3 words. "Interview rescheduled. Tuesday." Her reply came 6 minutes later. 4 words. "Tell me everything. Also, good." I smiled at my phone in that empty hotel room in a way I hadn't smiled in a long time. The full, uncomplicated, slightly surprised kind that happens when something you didn't plan turns out better than anything you could have arranged. We texted through that Tuesday and the one after. She told me about getting home to Denver, about walking into her apartment and finding it exactly as she had left it 5 days before, about how strange it felt to be in rooms that had absorbed a different version of herself. I told her about arriving at Farrow & Klein the second time. The elevator to the 14th floor, the clean lines of the reception desk, the framed project photos on the wall, and meeting the hiring manager, a quietly impressive man named Gerald Park, who shook my hand and said, "Before anything else, I heard you had an interesting route to getting here." I told him the short version. He listened the way careful people listen, and then he said, "That tells me something useful," and moved on to the interview. I accepted the position 11 days later. Clara's text came back in under a minute. "Martin would have liked you." I held my phone for a long time after that. Then I called her. Not texted, called. She picked up on the second ring, a little surprised, a little not. We talked for 2 hours and 11 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone when we finally said goodnight, and we both laughed at the number at the same moment, on opposite ends of the line. She came to Portland in early January, partly to finalize some paperwork from her father's estate. Mostly, she admitted over dinner the first evening, because she had been curious about me for 6 weeks and texts could only say so much. We went to a quiet Italian place near the river. She wore a dark green sweater and the watch from her father's apartment, the one that had stopped working. She caught me looking at it. "I'm getting it repaired," she said. "I just haven't yet. I'm not ready to hear it ticking again." I understood that completely. Some things you need to carry broken for a while before you're ready to fix them. She told me more about her work that evening, about the small businesses she designed for, a bakery in Cherry Creek, a bookshop in the Highlands, a pottery studio run by 2 sisters who had saved for 6 years to open it. She loved the stories behind each logo, the weight of what they meant to the people who'd built those lives. I talked about the bridge project I'd just been assigned at Farrow & Klein, about what it felt like to stand on a structure you had calculated from first principles. She listened the way she had in the airport, fully, with her whole attention, asking follow-up questions that meant she had actually heard what I said. We walked along the waterfront after dinner, our breath making small clouds in the January air. At some point, without any announcement, her hand found mine. We both noticed. Neither of us mentioned it. We kept walking. At the corner where we had to split for our separate hotels, she stopped and looked at me. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer honestly." "All right." "That day at the airport," she said, "before you came and sat next to me, what was your actual first instinct? Not what you did. What did you think first?" I considered the comfortable version, the one where I make myself sound more decisive than I actually was. Then I thought about 2 hours and 11 minutes on a phone call, and the way she had said Martin would have liked you without any performance in it, and I chose the truth instead. "I thought it wasn't my business," I said. "I told myself to stay where I was." She nodded slowly. "What changed?" "The second tier," I said. "You were working so hard not to let it fall, and then it did, and you were alone." I looked at her. I don't know how to see someone carry something that heavy by themselves and not try to hold some of it. Clara was quiet. The river moved behind us, dark and faintly luminous under the winter sky. A few lights from the far bank caught the surface of the water and scattered. "I haven't cried in front of anyone since my dad died," she said finally. "Not actually cried, not the full version of it. I cried in airport bathrooms, in my rental car with the radio turned up, never in front of someone, not once." She paused. "Until that day." "Why that day?" "Because you sat down," she said. "You didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't try to fix it. You just sat down and said hey and offered me a sugar packet like it was the most normal thing in the world." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't feel like I had to hold it together for you. I felt like I could just be however I actually was." I didn't answer right away. The city moved around us in its usual evening way. "That's all I wanted," I said. "For you to be however you actually were." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against my shoulder, just briefly, the way you lean against something solid when you've been standing upright for a long time and you finally trust the thing to hold your weight. I drove her to her hotel. We said goodnight in the lobby, neither of us in any hurry about the goodbye. She sent me a text from her room. "Tonight was good," and I replied, "Yeah, it really was." She had a flight back to Denver the next evening, and she texted me from the gate. I noticed, without saying anything, that she sent it from the seat near the window. I hoped the terminal didn't feel too much like the last one. A few minutes later, she sent a photo. The gray and gold of Portland spread out below the plane, taken just after Wheels Up. No caption, just the view. I looked at it for a long time. We called it what it was in March. Not with a formal conversation, not with any grand announcement. We were on the phone late on a Thursday, well past the point where the call should have ended, and she said, quietly and without leading up to it, "I think I've been in love with you since January. Possibly before that." And I said, "I know. I think I missed my flight on purpose. I just didn't know it yet." She laughed. The full version, the real one, nothing held back. The laugh I had heard for the first time in the terminal when I said something about sugar packets and had thought even then, without knowing why, that I would like to hear that again. By summer she had a client in Portland and was spending 3 weeks of every month in the city. By October she had quietly, gradually, in the way that real things happen without announcement or ceremony, moved her life here. She kept her Denver number. She brought the watch, repaired now, ticking steadily on her wrist. She put a framed photograph on the shelf in the apartment. Martin Reyes, standing in front of his high school classroom, grinning with the particular pride of a man who spent his whole life trying to help people become better versions of themselves. She calls home every Sunday at 7 o'clock, her mother in Phoenix, and she always starts the call the same way, with a single word she picked up without fully realizing it, carrying it forward from someone who made it feel like nothing ever really ended, just paused. So, I think about Gate 17 sometimes, about the departure board updating to departed, and the particular stillness of watching something you planned for a long time slip quietly into the past. I spent a long time believing that the things you lose are always losses. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. Some things you lose because something better needed the space. Some choices that look like mistakes from the outside turn out, from the inside, to have been the only sensible ones available. The flight to Seattle left without me on a Tuesday in late November, and I ended up somewhere better. Not because life rewards people for doing the right thing, not because the world runs on that kind of ledger, because it doesn't, and anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't been paying attention, but because a woman was crying alone in a plastic chair with her shoulders held in a shape I recognized, and I had a choice, and the choice turned out to be the most important one I have ever made. Not the interview, not the job, though I love the job. This. A cedar-scented memory and a Sunday phone call that starts with "so," and a woman who taught me that the best things in my life have never arrived on schedule. They've arrived in the space between plans, when I finally stopped watching the departure board and just sat down. I would miss that flight 100 more times. I wouldn't change a single minute of it.